Hi, Sugar Gliders. We are looking at Lesson 5, comparing and ordering rational numbers. So let's get started at the top. Whoops. Sorry about that. There we go. All right. Positive and negative rational numbers can be represented on a number line. So let's take a look at the vocabulary inside this sentence. We know what positive numbers are. They are numbers that are to the right of 0 on the number line. They are greater than 0. We know what negative numbers are. They are numbers that are to the left of 0 on the number line. They are less than 0. Do we know what rational numbers are? Remember, rational numbers are fractions, decimals, and percents. So we're going to be looking at fractions and decimals on the number line today. We've already looked at positive whole numbers such as 1 and 2. We've looked at their opposites such as -1 and -2 and 0. So remember, these are called integers. We're going to focus on the numbers that actually fall between all these numbers that we see on the number line. So on your paper, you should notice you have 0 in the middle of your number line. And at the right end, we have 1. At the left side of 0, we have -1. I put a mark here between the 0 and the 1, and a mark between the 0 and the -1. We want to graph the numbers in order from least to greatest. So let's start with our 1/2. 1/2 falls between 0 and 1. So to graph the number, we have to remember, mark a point on the line and then go ahead and label it with that fraction 1/2. It's a positive number. It's to the right of 0. 1/4, if I were to split up my number line into 4 equal sections, this would be 1/4. Here's 2/4, there's 3/4, and 1 gives us 4/4. So if I were to label my 1/4, it would be right here. And again, I want to mark it with a dot to show that I've actually graphed it. Remember, we just did our positive side, so negative numbers are on the left of 0. So you notice -1/2 is the opposite of a half. So it's just as far away from 0 as our positive 1/2 was, except it's on the opposite side. So there's -1/2, and then -1/4 again is the opposite of 1/4, so it's just as far away from 0 on our number line. You can see there. So we can see now that we can order rational numbers on a number line. Remember again that least numbers are farthest to the left on a number line. The greater numbers are farther to the right. Let's do a couple practice here. Graph the numbers on a number line. Compare the numbers using less than, greater than, or equal to. So on my number line, I'm going to start labeling it. You should already have a 0 in the middle, and then a 2 on the end, and a -2 at the opposite end on the negative side, and then a 1 and a -1. Yours is already labeled like that. I need to plot where -1.2 would be. Well, I know it's going to be somewhere between -1 and -2. If I were to split up this section of my number line right here into 10 equal sections, because they're in 2/10, I'd have 1, -1.1, -1.2, -1.3, -1.4, 0.5, and so on, 0.6, 7, 8, 9. So I can see from how I just split it up, -1.2 would be just about there, and then I would label it. Okay, my 0.8 is a positive rational number, so it's to the right of 0. And again, if I were to split between 0 and 1 into 10 equal sections, because it's in 8/10, I'd have 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10. So 0 and 8/10 would be right about there. And I can see since negative 1.2 is to the left of 0.8, negative 1.2 is less than 0.8. Now you could have looked at this number and said, well, a negative is always going to be less than a positive. So we don't really need to graph it, but I do want you to get a feel for where it is on the number line. All right, let's try negative 1.40 and negative 1.25. Your number line is marked in the middle with negative 1.5, negative 1 to the right, negative 2 to the left. Okay, so if I looked at negative 1 and negative 2, I could see that negative 1.5 is going to be exactly between those two. So where would negative 1.4 belong? Well, it's going to be right before negative 1.5. Okay, because it would be negative 1.4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then negative 1. All right, negative 1.25 would be like right here, negative 1.25. Because if I were to add a 0 here, we could see that negative 1.25 is halfway between negative 1 and negative 1.5. It's halfway between, so it would be right about there. So on our number line, negative 1.4 is to the left of negative 1.25, so it must be less than. Now finally, we have fractions. We have to get used to how we're going to start comparing fractions and decimal rational numbers. So the first thing I'm going to have you do is figure out what negative 3/8 is as a decimal. And if you were to use your calculator, you would see it's negative 0.375. So we start by changing fractions to decimals. And then we would calculate on our calculator what is 5/16 as a decimal. And I think I forget, negative 0.3125, I think. All right, so where am I going to line these up? I am going to have two numbers, one at each end and then one in the middle. These numbers are going to fall between negative 0.3 and negative, I'm going to move this, negative 0.4. Okay, so that means if I want to, since negative 3.125 has 4 decimal digits, I'm going to annex a 0 on here so this one has 4 as well. Now I'm going to annex zeros onto the numbers I graphed to help me graph these two numbers a little bit easier. They all have 4 decimal digits now. What would go right in the middle? I'm going to focus on 30 and 40. So what's between 30 and 40? It's 0.35 is between 30 and 40, and I'm going to put my 2 zeros there. So this is the order of negative decimal numbers on the number line. So 0.375 must fit somewhere in this area, because 37 comes after 35. And I'm just going to take a guess to say it's like 35, right about here. Okay, and it was negative 3/8 on the up here, so that's really negative 3/8, which is the same as negative 0.375. And then where would negative 5/16 be on the number line? Well, negative 0.3125. Here's negative 0.30, so 31 must be about here. So this is negative 0.3125. And again, that was negative 5/16. It's the same thing. So looking on the number line, we can see 3/8 is to the left, so negative 3/8 is less than negative 5/16. Okay, I believe there is another page, so go ahead to the next page. You do not have to graph these, but I'd like you to change them all to decimals and see how they compare. Come back with any questions you may have. Good night.